the yin and the yang is a big part of my own life, and utilizing infinite amount of information and energy in the human experience that's limited in itself, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally limited. Welcome to Entrepreneurs, the Playbook. I'm David Meltzer. Super excited to have a special guest here, an extraordinary venture capitalist. He is the founder of Foresite Capital, Jim Tananbaum. Welcome to the Playbook.
Great to be here, Dave. Thanks for having me.
You know, our backgrounds are not similar. You got accepted to Harvard. I got rejected twice. You're a doctor. I'm about to get an honorary doctorate this week, actually. Yes, I will not be calling myself doctor. I do have a Juris Doctorate, which may or may not be comparatively equal. But it's interesting because I see later on in my career people attaching themselves to careers, industries, and jobs. You went to med school at Harvard, and then later on applied business aptitude to what you learned as your core skill set, competency, let's call it. I went to law school and then applied business to what I had learned in law school. The reason I got hired at Lee Steinberg, for those of you that may not know, the most notable sports agent in the world, they made the movie Jerry Maguire. I got hired in 48 hours after meeting Lee Steinberg, not because I was a great lawyer. I was an oil and gas lawyer, a maritime lawyer who ended up working for West Publishing and the internet and then going to Silicon Valley and raising hundreds of millions of dollars. But Lee hired me not because I was a great sports agent, not because I had this, amazing law background, but I was the only one who at the highest level had a technology background and a venture capital background. And he saw in the early 2000s, the future of sports was going to be in venture and technology. That was his vision. I think he was right. And I'm certainly glad that he trusted me to run the sports agency with that type of background. You have done the exact same thing. You're a doctor, like a real doctor, not like an honorary degree doctor like me. You actually have put in the work at the greatest, in my opinion, academic institution, one that rejected me twice, now pays for me to speak there once in a while. But my brothers went there, Harvard, Penn, Columbia. How long in your career did it take you, your playbook to success, to figure out that this education isn't necessarily directly prescribed to the profession I'm going to be in?
Okay, so as crazy as this sounds, I actually went into Harvard with the playbook of using it to get into it.
It's good that's so good because I went into law school the same way.
I was like, first, there's all this amazing research that's going on. I was actually at this joint Harvard MIT program, which
Those two schools suck, by the way.
It's a really geeky program, and it exposed me to a lot that was going on both campuses. But you look at research back then, and the biotech industry was just starting, and you just had to say, my God, it's like there's going to be so much change, immense change, and it's all going to be driven by product development. It's all going to be driven by things that help people, and just to think about the academic breadth of what's going on at those two places, and wow, wouldn't it be cool to leverage that background, those networks, that that education to to bring it out in the world broadly. And so that was the game plan from the beginning.
What percentage of kids, or were there any other kids at school at that time utilizing their medical degrees in a non-traditional manner? I speak at Tulane, where I went to law school, about utilizing your law degree in a non-traditional manner. Were there a contingent of students that had the same perspective?
Yes, Larry Paul was a year below me at Harvard Medical School, and there weren't very many of us that were looking outside.
Yeah,
and the deans were kind of humoring us and thinking that we would come back into the fold. And I ultimately ended up recruiting one of the deans into one of the startup companies that I was working on, and got him totally on the dark side. But Larry was my compadre that was looking outside, and he ultimately ended up buying a piece of the Steelers.
That's right, I know the name.
So he got into, his family had been leveraged buyouts, and they did a series of leveraged buyouts as single deals. The family was its own fund, and then ultimately they rolled all that into the Steelers.
And what type of mentorship did you have? Because obviously you seem to have grown up in the same type of hyper academic family that I have, where the fetus wasn't fully developed till after graduate school, and several, doctor, lawyer, or failure. Those types of themes seem to be resonating with both of us. But I always found that there was someone in my life who was a mentor as I went into law school, gave me some clarity of you don't have to do what everybody wants you to do. You don't have to think like everybody else thinks. You do have to learn and take this seriously. But there's a lot of options and opportunities that other people aren't taking advantage of. Did you have a mentor or someone you were looking up to that kind of led you in that way?
A little bit. I mean, I was the first member of our family to go to an Ivy League school.
I wish I could tell you the same, but the only thing I stood out in my family is I played college football. If I told my family, no lie, at a family reunion, oh, I went to Harvard and graduated summa cum laude, they literally be like, oh, okay, like who doesn't in our family? That's how awful it is.
Where'd you play baseball for?
Occidental. So yeah, Division III. Yeah. The only place that would let me play. There's a really long list of people recruiting me.
I wrestled for Yale for a couple of years, but I was
awesome. So we have the same athletic background. Good.
So, it was funny. When I was young, I was very far ahead in math, and was always, just kind of leaning into that. And ran into a professor at NYU. I went to Columbia when I was in high school, took their math courses, and went to NYU's graduate school, took their graduate math courses, ran into a professor there who was at a place called the Courant Institute. He kind of took me under his wing for a couple of years, and then I rolled into Yale and ended up with another professor in engineering that I worked with for a number of years there. And then when I went to Harvard and MIT, I was fortunate enough to run into, actually maybe sidebar, I wanted to try to network into the community of academic founders. And so I listed a course at Harvard and at MIT on successful entrepreneurs in academia, and invited anybody I could find.
Yeah. It's like Jewish sports heroes, man. There's a long list of those. At your time. Today is probably different.
It was probably still a little smaller than Jewish sports heroes. There weren't many back then. Now it's a different story, but I ended up inviting a whole bunch of people in that had founded companies, and one of those people, George Whitesides, became my business partner. And we decided after teaching a little bit together that we were going to try and do something together. And then ultimately he invited a series of very famous faculty members in for donuts every weekend. And we would brainstorm, and it took us a couple of years, but we ultimately ended up converging on it.
That is amazing. Now, one of the other similarities that we have, maybe from our family backgrounds, is that I wrote a book with Blaine Bartlett called Compassionate Capitalism. My motto is to make a lot of money so that we can help a lot of people and have fun in our lives, because I've never met anyone ever in my life that makes a lot of money and helps people with it and has fun that isn't happy. It seems to me that you had a purpose-driven pursuit. I'm the chairman of Napoleon Hill Institute. Definiteness of purpose is a big theme song in my life. It seems that you always have had an aligned purpose beyond the academia and the money, but there is a reason that you're doing what you're doing.
Well, from a very early age, I probably should have mentioned this earlier when we were talking about influences. My mother, from the time I was really young, it was like, you're going to change the world. You're going to
great programming.
You're going to have.
She's right.
And that kind of got me going. That I have to have purpose in my life. I have to have impact of stuff that I'm doing. And then you go to these great academic institutions, and they're really about transformation. They're about, original thinking. They're about changing the world. They're about, many years in the future thinking. And that got me going really on the path of, I want to focus on transformation. I want to partner with great people. I want to be super persistent in what I do. And I want to measure, what I have done by impact on the world. And those traits that have been in the background for years, I still honestly feel fall, pretty short on those traits, but feel like I still got a lot of time in front of me, and
Yep.
we're doing some really interesting things these days, and every decade I seem to be, doing other versions, other, sort of iterations on things. But I actually think that the decade that we're in right now is probably going to see as much transformation, as much change as our lifetime. I think that, it's extraordinary what is going on right now. And so my hope is that over the next 10 to 20 years, I'll be able to actually look back and say, geez, I actually got to where I was hoping there.
And to that measure, obviously AI is going to be an engine, a contributor to the transformation that occurs in the next 3 to 5 years, even. We're a little bit longer in the tooth. I've been involved and you've been involved in technology for a while.
Yeah.
This is still pre-chasm, although AI has been around for a decade and been familiar with it. I believe we're still pre-chasm, and I've been blessed to be in pre-chasm internet, middleware, hardware throughout my career. AI in particular in your space has a significant capability of making humans more human.
Yes.
And what you do is aligned with making humans more human. Is there something that excites you most within the context of Foresite Capital where AI is contributing to an acceleration of this transformation?
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So at Foresite Capital, I have two different agendas. One agenda is to produce returns for our investors in short to intermediate term.
The MBA comes through shareholder value. I get it.
The other agenda is very big long-term value, very, sort of grand long-term things that change the world. The problem is that they take a long time, to develop value. And so, so now in the shorter term, there's a lot that has evolved over the last decade that's making drugs more efficient, and that's allowing us to understand disease development earlier through genetics and blood testing and imaging and other things. And those have not made their way yet into mainstream practice, but they're going to be, things that are relatively short-term impactful. And I would say if anybody that, wants to live an extra 10 years, all they need to do is figure out their individual risk. How do you figure out your individual risk? Well, you go and take a Prenuvo test every year. You get a Grail test every year. You look at your cholesterol and other things that are modifiable. And those are the things that kill 95% of the population. You can push them all off if you catch them early. So, so there's a portion of what we do that's short term, that's focused on things that are relatively reduced to practice, but haven't ultimately been broadly implemented, and getting them out into the world. Then there's the bigger, conversation of how can we change the whole healthcare system? How can we individualize healthcare at very large scale using all of the tools that are now available to us in AI? That's the question we're super interested in. Another question we're super interested in is how can we transform product development, virtualize it entirely, get out of the lab. So I would say that those are two long range conversations that are actually very real and happening right now, but will manifest themselves for years.
Yeah, with the aspect coming from my background, as CEO of Samsung's phone division in the first kind of hardware, middleware, transcoding, XML, I see this progression into wearables and then insertables. But what most people I don't realize, and I think Foresite has the foresight to understand, is that in the individualized care that can create and analyze our own individual genetic and energetic inheritance, which is coded in the human experience, is beyond the solutions that can be customized per our actual live and dead blood cells and all the different tests that can contribute to 95% of the deaths. But it's the data that interests me even more, that as we have more wearables, we can now individualize the data and then aggregate it. In fact, there's so much regulation right now being proposed to allow people to sell their individual data to insurance companies, to companies like yours, that we can now aggregate all of these individuals' with their data that are personalized, customized to themselves?
Yeah, I think data is a really important question, and it turns out we're going to find that all data is not created equal. In fact, for each person, there's a small amount of data that generally is not collected routinely yet that would provide the most amount of information for the dollar spent. And top of the list right now that's not done routinely is sequencing. All of us should get sequenced, but the problem with sequencing is that the interpretation of the sequencing, the software to interpret the sequencing, is just coming along right now. And you have to look at all 20,000 genes at once. You can't look at individual genes, which is the way that software is primarily done right now. Individual genes, don't get me wrong, it will affect 1, 2, 3% of the population. But if you really want to get at the things that kill most of us, you have to look at all 20,000 of your genes working together. But that's a math problem, and that's a math problem that's been solved. And so now that has to roll out into the population. And over the next 5 to 10 years, sequencing will be part of the baseline data that's selected. There's other data that, given your sequence, it's really what your sequence tells you when you look at all 20,000 genes is what if I inherit it?
Right.
Then there's given my risk for inheritance, what is going on, in me at any given point in time. So part of the conversation is what have I inherited? What have I risked? And the other part of it is what's going on. And the what's going on piece of this is looking at blood and proteins and some wearable data. But at the end of the day, for a lot of people, wearable data is not going to be all that informative. For a small percentage of the population that has various sort of preconceived risks, wearable data is going to be incredibly helpful. And for other people, other types of data will be helpful. So the whole question of how do you sort the most impactful piece of data for you as an individual? That's something that Bob's going to help us with, and that's again, kind of a unique feature. So then it all comes down to, we don't need a whole lot of data with each and every one of us to basically live our healthiest possible lives. And so that's going to be, like at scale, no one's going to have to think that hard about it. You go in and you take a blood draw and you check a few boxes, and then all this stuff is assembled, and you go in for imaging, and this stuff is
crazy.
And, yeah.
Well, I always think it's funny because I tell people all the time when they're stressing over their diet or stressing over their data, I was like, you realize that stress is causing more harm than the benefit of getting that data or, dieting, whatever stress you're putting on yourself. I said, it is very simple between dis-ease and ease, and anything that can create the ease in our lives will dissipate, dissolve that dis-ease. To finish up, I'm going to go with this dichotomy that we're talking about, because the yin and the yang is a big part of my own life, and utilizing infinite amount of information and energy in the human experience that's limited in itself, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally limited. I would love to hear your take, someone that has great logic. You're obviously an extraordinary academic, mathematician, scientist, all of the things that you're able and capable of doing, and business person in the analytical world. But it's rare that we combine it with this imagination that was instilled in you by your mom. This, I can do anything, change the world. And to that end, I believe a reflection of that is some of the things that we read outside of the texts, the editorials, published information that you and I can absorb and do research on. Is there a certain thing that you've read in your life that has had a emotional impact, an imaginative impact, a limitless impact, something that outside of academia, a philosophy, theory, spirituality that you've read that may have expanded your own self-image?
All right. I got to think on this. I may not have a very satisfying answer.
It's yours, not mine. I'm so satisfied with this interview, it doesn't matter. Yeah, Plus, I'll edit it out if it sucks. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I gotta. I'm sure there is, but it's a distant away. Well, when I'll tell you these days what I'm doing.
But it's not the Bible.
Yeah, it's not definitely not fun.
Yeah.
These days, I'm actually conferring with bots. With ChatGPT.
Sure.
And, I'm trying to use bots to help me think about what I should be thinking about.
Yeah, consciousness. I use it for that, right? You can't solve a problem in the same consciousness. It's a great.
Right. Yeah. So I hate to say it, but I'm reading less and I'm chatting more in the bots.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then I have a stream of stuff that people send me, and it's kind of random. But I'm just trying to think if there's something really good that I've seen recently, and I'm drawing a blank.
I think the answer of the aspect of someone like yourself that is interacting with separate consciousnesses through Chat GPT or other bots, that I think that's the answer I was looking for, which is different than, Think and Grow Rich or Outwitting the Devil or,
Yeah.
Rich Dad Poor Dad or whatever, or Bible, which so many people will answer on that respect. It's so interesting, the idea of Foresite Capital, because you seem to be thinking ahead in a longer term vision, both financially as well as spiritually, in what you're doing for the greater good in providing a healthier, wealthier way of living. Foresite Capital, the incredible Jim Tananbaum, founder and CEO, check them out. They will absolutely play an integral part in our well-being. I want to thank you, Jim, for joining me here on the Playbook.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it, Dave.
Incredible conversation. I'm Dave Meltzer with Entrepreneurs, the Playbook.